on this edition of the Self-Publishing Show.
Quite a lot of traditionally published authors, and one said to me last year, my contract's up, I'm just really worried. I don't know if my publisher will renew. And I went, why are you worried? They went, well, if they don't renew. And I went, self-publish. And they look at you as if you're a bit mad. And you go, you've got to understand it's a new and brave world out there.
Publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers, no more barriers, no one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Publishing Show with me, James Blatch.
And me, Mark Dawson.
Hey, Mark Dawson, how are you doing?
Hey, James Blatch. I'm okay. Been very busy. Lots of things going on. Some things we get to talk about soon, I think.
Yes.
Maybe. Something really, potentially really cool, which we've been kind of working on for about 6 months, which we can't mention yet, but hopefully in the next month or two, we might be able to make a quite exciting announcement.
I've had more meetings with lawyers in the last year than I had in my life up until that point. But deals like the Hello Books deal, these don't get over the line without getting into the weeds on stuff. And it's
if only you knew someone who could take care of all of that for you.
Yeah, I tell you what, that is a blessed relief in our working relationship that I basically leave all that shit to you.
Yes, it is. It's very tedious, and
but you love it. You love all that tedium.
I don't love it. There are some things I quite enjoy about the process. But yes, I mean, it did remind me of some of the things we've had to be doing over the last few weeks that I'm quite pleased to be doing what I'm doing now rather than doing what I did then. I'll say that. It's much more enjoyable to not have to do legal stuff and also things like, keep speaking as an ex-lawyer and how boring it was to account for every 6 minutes of your time, which is what you have to do when you're billing people. It's like it's usually 6 minute increments, and it's really tedious.
I can't only imagine.
No, it's horrible. So no, I don't miss that. That's for sure.
So you much prefer writing. What are you writing at the moment?
I'm at the end actually of the Milton book Uppercut, which is set in Dublin. So that's gone to my copy editor, and I'll get that back probably by Friday. In the meantime, I'm doing a little short novella with a new character. Well, second book with a new character. Scout. Well, I think he agrees. He agrees that that's an excellent way to spend my time. And so, those are both going quite well. I'm also plotting Atticus 4 and Milton 23, I think it is. So kind of working on lots of things at the same time. And also, as I mentioned to you the other day, I'm seeing really excellent success with Facebook ads, I think, although I'm not, something happened the other day that makes me question this, on Atticus. So Atticus, the first 3 books, have basically doubled, I think, the profit they're making. Actually, more than tripled the profit they're making just by advertising to the first book in the series. So but
that is also on the back of being on the Richard and Judy book club, isn't it?
I don't know that there's that much bleed through, because this is not paperback or print. This is digital. It could be that. I can't say there's no effect. There must be some effect from that, but I don't think it would be as significant. I mean, Atticus 1 has been in the top 30, I'll say, for about 5 or 6 weeks, and this is a book that's like over 2 years old now, so it's been just sitting there, and then obviously I'm seeing really strong read through into book 2 and book 3, which is good. And so I've just been juicing it with Facebook ads and Amazon ads. But it's weird, just thinking to myself, I was pretty sure it was the Facebook ads, but then I reduced the spend on the Amazon ads by about 50% yesterday, and profits dropped by not by that amount, but they dropped. Now that's only one day, and it could just be a fluke. So let's keep an eye on it.
Small sample size,
very small. But
that's good. I think I mentioned last time out that I've been running, for the first time, I've properly been running lead magnet adverts, so lead gen ads in Facebook to build my mailing list. So my mailing list I'd not really focused a lot on, but I wrote the 3rd book as a novella specifically to do that. But it sold quite well because I think I'd built up an audience for books 1 and 2, and they wanted to buy book 3. So I kept it going and sort of marketed it as a regular book. And then I think about 6 weeks ago, thought, okay, now's the time. So I took it out of KU, went wide with it, put it onto BookFunnel, started running lead gen ads. And I think I mentioned this too, but I've now totted up June last month. And I run Amazon ads to my book, to probably all my books actually. Amazon ads to all 3 books, Cold War thrillers. Facebook ads just to lookalike audiences and so on, trying to get signups to the BookFunnel link, lead gen. And I can't remember how much I spent on that. It's probably about £700 and knocking on $1,000 with the rate. I made a £77 profit and added 560 odd signups to my list. Bearing in mind my list was less than 1,000, or had only just gone over 1,000. Begin this, so I've half my list again has been added in a month, and I made a small profit. So I'm just going to keep doing that for now. That's, I think, 6 months of that really building up my list. I'm very happy with that. If that continues.
Just what I would do at this point is monitor the responsiveness of those subscribers. It's no good adding them. See how much it's costing you. Also, you can start to do kind of work out how much you think each one of those subscribers is worth. And yeah, there's been lots of guesswork in there, but you can kind of look at how the ads, the emails they're clicking on in your automation sequence to try and work out how much you think they're buying, how many books they're buying. And look at things like, what's their open rate, what's their click rate, all that kind of stuff. But no, that's, sounds like a pretty good start.
But I've got to think that people joining my mailing list and buying the books 1 and 2, which are paid, has got to be contributing to the fact that I've made a small profit overall. Yeah,
probably. Yeah, it's probably not good enough. It might be the best you can do, but if you've got to drill into that as much as you can, but that does sounds likely.
Yeah, and I certainly, anecdotally, I get emails. Probably I get an email every other day now from somebody saying, I was saying on one of the interviews I recorded this morning, they're quite quaint, some of the older people who don't really understand the mailing list. So they reply to an email saying, I said, did you enjoy Desert Venom? They said, well, I haven't started it yet, James, but thank you very much for asking. And it's lovely that they, I treat it like it was a one-on-one email when I reply to it.
Yes, yeah.
But I get an email every other day from someone saying, really enjoyed Desert Venom. Can't wait to read your books. Just bought them. And so anecdotally, that's just an anecdote. But
no, that's great.
And
something I've always preached all the way since we've been doing this is those, by just replying to them in a way that is not obviously canned. Will turn them, probably make them. They've taken the time to write to you, right? And I think if you write back, now they don't know that it's you in your shed in your garden, right? They don't know. It's easy for us to think in the space that we work in as authors that all the mystery is gone, because we see how the sausage is made, and so. But it's worth going back. I tried to think what it was like when I was a child and writing to. Like if I wrote a letter to Stephen Donaldson, right, who wrote a very, very good fantasy double trilogy with someone called Thomas Covenant, really, really good books. And I loved it. I think he's an amazing writer. And if he had written, he got me because of a lifetime fan, because his books are bloody brilliant. But if I just read the first one and he wrote back with, actually, better example, Terry Pratchett, who lived not far from me, a friend of mine had leukemia when he was a child, when I was in high school. And he loved Terry Pratchett. So I wrote to Terry Pratchett and said, look, my friend's got leukemia. He loves your books. I love them too. Is there anything, you could do? And he sent back a signed photograph, a letter that he'd obviously written and signed, and a book. And just, that's the extreme example, but that kind of response, which wasn't by his assistant or his PA or anything, he'd done that. That's almost incalculably, apart from being very nice, is incalculably valuable when it comes to how much that makes me want to buy everything he ever writes.
Yes.
So he wasn't doing that commercially. Obviously, he was doing that because he was a nice person. But that kind of principle, I think, is something that is easy to forget sometimes. That just having an author write back that you like is really special. So anyway, all those old people who are kind of sending you emails and thanking you and complaining about can't get the books on their device.
Yes,
they're probably telling all their friends that there's this nice young man called James.
Yeah. And of course, the great thing if you use BookFunnel is I'm coincidentally interviewing Damon Courtney this afternoon, who runs BookFunnel, but their support is fantastic. So we do get, if you do use BookFunnel, you will get those emails from people saying they can't.
when you speak to Damon, tell him he needs to produce templates in German.
Okay.
Because I use BookFunnel for everything, and I don't think, unless I'm completely wrong, and he probably ought to be on top of this, because I'm sure I'm not the only one who's running kind of giveaways for German
talking about
audience.
Landing pages and so on in German.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you can kind of amend some of it, but some bits you can't. I did get a few emails I sent out a free book, a novella that I just had translated. I gave it away to my list in Germany, and I probably got half a dozen emails from people saying they couldn't understand how to do it. So Damon needs to think about landing pages in German, and also support emails in German as well, which obviously you could do it with DeepL or Google Translate, but that's something, as more authors get into translation, will become more and more relevant, I think. And if he doesn't do it, someone in Germany is going to do it. So he needs to stake his claim. Also, tell him that's my rate is 5% for that excellent business idea.
Yes. Okay. Well, my cut for passing that on is 2.5%. So.
Okay. It's getting expensive for him.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you better do it soon before more people get in. All right, I'll mention that. I mean, hopefully we'll have a chat as well as me just labouring him with the stuff he's got to do. Right. Okay. Good chat. We have an interview today with Tim Sullivan, who was one of the panelists at Self-Publishing Show Live in London. So before we hear from Tim, a reminder that you can look at that panel. In fact, you can see every session, including the excellent session from Bella Andre on translations and how you should be going about them, not leaving money on the table. If you get a digital ticket to our show, which you can do at selfpublishingformula.com/digital. Those sessions are released on August the 3rd and 4th. Over the 2 days, we're going to have a couple of live interviews to go with them as well. And there'll be additional sessions going into that digital package that weren't at the live show. So last chance coming up to buy that before we release those sessions in August. So Tim Sullivan is a man with a lot of experience writing in television and film. He even wrote the full-length feature My Little Pony, not very similar to the stuff he writes, which is Crime Now. He's turned his attention to novels, and he absolutely loves self-publishing, although he's also done a trad deal, but self-publishing was a new love he discovered. He's a very dynamic man, Tim, and unlike some writers who would be happy to sit back and let their publisher do everything, he is somebody who wants to get going. And I think that must be Mads. Is that Mads?
Yeah, that's Mads. Yep.
Yes, we hear about Mads if you're watching on YouTube. She's just delivered Mark's beer for the afternoon, tea, in his golf mug. Yes, anyway, so Tim Sullivan can tell you all about himself in our interview, and then Mark and I will be back for a quick chat at the end.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Tim Sullivan, welcome to the Self-Publishing Show. We had you in person very recently on stage in London at the Self-Publishing Show Live, but here we are to get a little bit under the skin of Tim Sullivan. Sounds like it'll be autobiography one day. Why don't you start by introducing yourself and telling us a bit about your career, Tim?
So my name's Tim Sullivan, and I'm a screenwriter, and I've mostly worked in film and TV all my life. Directed in TV, made a movie. I've written a few movies, and then recently, as of the last sort of 3 years, I've delved into writing crime, which has always been a long ambition of mine. Long-held ambition, and COVID sort of seemed to be the right time to find out whether I could do it. So I started, and thanks to your course, self-published. I found myself in a position where I had to self-publish, which we can talk about later. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Great. Well, I definitely want to talk about the transition to writing novels and how that came about and why and how you found it. But I'm also keen to talk a little bit about your background in directing and writing in TV and film. I mean, the directing, I always find that curious. I worked in news in television, which was like the poor relation of any kind of proper television. We did things very badly with cameras, pretending we were. And I used to work at Television Centre and BBC, where all these amazing programs were made. We had no clue about TV. But I was always jealous of the big productions and how they operated, and curious also, particularly about the director role. Because a director seems to be quite a technical role in film and television, and yet you're very editorial, you're very story focused. I suppose that probably makes a better director, does it?
I think so. I mean, I think it's interesting you should mention news, because I was lucky enough to do the Granada trainee director scheme that used to exist. And after you're trained for a few months, one of your first jobs was to direct the local news live. And in those days, video had a 3-second queue time, and film, which was still doing news on Stripe, had a 7-second
oh my goodness.
introduction time. So everything had to be queued up front. And in fact, I met my wife in the local news. She was the local news reporter.
Huh.
So my background is also in news. I think that it depends. It depends on directors in drama, because some tend to be just very technical. In America, it's quite interesting in America. You'll find that a lot of big series have pilots directed by Brits, and then they go on to use Americans, because American TV directors tend to be shooters. They shoot from every other angle because the power is now with the story, the showrunner and the executive producers. So American directors tend to provide them with a lot of footage. British directors tend to have more of a kind of view of what it should be.
Like a vision, their own vision they're trying to realize.
Yeah. Which maybe the executive producers don't want so much after a while. But in the UK, it's still very much a kind of, I think, you've got to be editorially focused. But I think there's been a shift recently to producers and production executives, some of whom have never made drama, now being in charge of script. But for me, I was a technical director, but also very much an actor's and a word director. Script was everything to me.
Yeah. It's funny, actually. I got a friend, a neighbour's daughter, who's just started a script assistant on some quite big, I won't name them, but quite big shows. And I've been saying to her, you need to be reading novels. And because it's all about story, for me, it's all about story. Everything lives or dies on that front. And if everybody at every stage in a production is thinking, does this make sense? Do I want to know what happens next? That's going to help the whole production.
Absolutely. There's no question of that in my mind. When people say to me, there's this film course, what do you think? Shall I go on this film course? And I go, no, go to university and read a degree in English.
Yeah. History in English. Yeah.
Or history.
Yeah.
Any of those things that teach you a narrative and everyone watches enough TV and film in their life to self-educate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly true. And we're the first people to point out, or often people are able to say why they don't like something, but it doesn't take too much working out to realize. When we worked at the BBFC, we watched a lot of TV and film, 5.5 hours a day, 5 days a week. And you'd very quickly know when a story didn't work, or when it did work, or when there was a half-baked concept, or films became, sometimes very big films with millions of dollars behind them didn't work, which has always amazed me they got to that stage, but happens.
Yeah, and I think that in the American system, films often go into production too early.
Yeah.
Because of various factors like cast availability or location availability or money. And the script isn't ready. And they think, well, we'll fix it in the edit.
Yeah.
You can't fix things you can't fix everything in the edit.
No. There's that great Batman cartoon. Robin says, oh, we'll fix it in post. And Batman says, you fix that shit now, slapping him. Which is it should be on every film set.
Yeah.
I think I saw in your CV you've directed Sherlock on TV. Was that the
Jeremy Brett?
Yes, series. That was superb. I mean, absolutely. For such a well-trodden storyline, I soaked up every frame of that series.
Yeah, no, it was great. I did 2 1 hours in the casebook of Sherlock Holmes, and then did a final 2-hour movie called The Last Vampire, which was based on a short story called The Sussex Vampire. But Jeremy was just, for me, was the definitive Holmes, really. He was so loyal to the character and so devoted in everything he did to the character. He almost considered himself to be a sort of caretaker. And he had bonkers ideas. That was what was brilliant, that there was a danger to his Holmes. And he expressed that often when you were working by pushing against you as a director. And it was your job to work out what was genius and what was just damn right bonkers.
Yeah.
And rein him in.
You have to be quite a strong character sometimes when you're up against competing creative ideas and directions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, when you go into a series like that, where, he'd been doing it for some years now, you have to respect what he does and tune into that to get the best out of that. There's no point in going in with your alternative version. It's that, your job as a director is to bring out the best in that actor. And, that shouldn't involve confrontation. And it certainly didn't with Jeremy.
Yeah. So maybe that was partly your love for Sherlock and so on, is partly in your mind about crime. Crime fiction is a huge genre. It's a big selling genre. And people tend to devour the series once they've found an author. Was there a commercial decision as well in your mind, as well as a creative outlet for you writing crime fiction?
No, it was purely that at the beginning, I've always wanted to see if I could write a novel. I always felt the novels were a bit more grown up, and I never had the chance. And at the beginning of lockdown, the film work had petered off, and I thought I'd been working on an idea for TV, and I thought, hang on, I'm going to make this a book, and so George Cross was born. And no, it was simply I wanted to, if you're a successful screenwriter, something like 80% of your work, which is paid for, never sees the light of day. In the old days, it used to stack up in scripts on people's office shelves in Hollywood. It doesn't even do that anymore. It's on their desktop. It's in their computer somewhere. And after a while, that gets really frustrating. I spent a year on Shrek 4. And then at the end of that year, I thought we had a really good story about Shrek going in search of his father, who was going to be played by Sean Connery. And then they bring in a director who just has a completely different idea of what he wants to do. He wants to remake It's a Wonderful Life. And that's it. That's the end. The director will always bring in his writer. And so you find yourself with a really good script, or certainly the beginnings of a great script, that's just cast to one side. Scripts are the cheapest thing in Hollywood. So after a while, it gets frustrating. And I thought, I want to write a book. And I thought, I foolishly felt that I had enough of a track record to attract publishers and literary agents. Obviously, I have film and TV agents and whatever, but it wasn't to be the case, which is when I came across you guys.
So you did initially query or reach out to agents?
Yeah, I reached out to 3 agents, one of whom included my own agency, who turned me down. And my own film and TV agent went, "Oh, why are you doing this? Don't. Crime fiction, it's just so competitive. Don't do it." And I just said, "Look, I'm doing it, and that's it." And then I was turned down by a couple of agents because my character is autistic. And I've done enormous amounts of research. I've done about 2 years prior to putting pen to paper, met up with various world experts, done a lot of research, read a huge number of books, and felt I was ready to do it. But I was asked whether I was autistic. And I said, no, I'm not. And then I was asked whether my children were autistic.
Oh, dear.
I thought it was a really odd question. And they said, look, publishers are going to shy away from this. Everyone's worried about neuroscientific appropriation. And I just went, what? So I thought, in that moment, I thought, that's it. I'm in my 60s. I'm starting this late. I'm just going to get on with it. Looked into self-publishing, came across your course with Mark, and thought, right, okay, it's February. I'm publishing this in July. And worked out various things from the course. Like, I needed a good cover design. And which is not easy in itself. I found someone on the internet, and it was I thought he was really good. And then when he sent me the first design, it was literally something I could have done myself in 10 minutes. And I was cross, and I was talking to him on the phone saying, I want my books to look like Peter May's books. And I was flicking through the Peter May book I had in my hand to find out who had designed it. Saw they had a website and just fired the bloke. Went, don't worry, keep the money, I'm off. Emailed these people, and then the Peter May's designer got in touch with me and said, "Oh, I'll do it."
Wow.
And it cost a bit, but the one thing I learned from your course is you have to invest.
Yeah.
You've got to invest in cover design, and you've got to invest in editorial.
And are they your original covers that are on Amazon today? Have you redesigned them?
No, they wanted to remarket them. So the original covers are now collector's items. But yeah, we've gone through a couple of phases with Head of Zeus, and I'm now pleased with the kind of final look of them. But it was amazing when Dave Grogan did the first pass on The Dentist. I mean, as soon as I opened up the file, it just went, well, that's it.
Yeah.
You know, some people know and some people don't. And Dave was actually the first one to say to me, why are you self-publishing? You know, these are really good. And I was going, well, you know, good books do get self-published. And I've got this problem with autism. And my idea was to find out whether I would get knocked back. Of course, I put the book up on Amazon before I followed the chapter in the course that said you really need to have 2 books.
Yeah. So
it was, oh, shit. So then I had to quickly sit down and write book 2 before book 1 was published. So then I had 2 books. And then I followed your advice, and I started the first book off cheaply, then went up to $2.99, advertising the second book, which if you're with a publisher, you can't do in terms of a link. You can't have a link with Amazon, but if you're self-published, they seem to let you do it. And then I advertised. I learned about Facebook advertising with you guys. And the sales were going very well. And then I, you know, bit my lip and made the first book free when the second book came out. And basically it just suddenly had a life of its own.
Wow.
And I was picked up by Barnes & Noble in the States, who got in touch with me saying, can we make this the free book of Friday? I got a book ad, which I was lucky to get. And then, you know, within 4 months, so from July to about November, we had over 200,000 downloads.
Wow.
For the 2 books. And it was like, oh. And, you know, then when you look at the money that you're earning, and my wife said, you must stop me when I'm talking too much. And
you're not. We're lapping up every word, especially a bit about the money and what your wife said.
Yeah, well, you know, she said, you know, we need to get you some. I mean, neither of us knew. She's an Emmy award-winning TV producer, but we didn't know about the publishing world. So we didn't know whether 200,000 books, of which quite a few were free, was a good thing or a bad thing. We knew it wasn't a bad thing, but we didn't know it was a good thing. So I went to find a publicist, and I ended up with Midas, and they read the book and went, oh, can we show this to our CEO? He's just started a literary agency. And I went, no, why? I'm doing really well. And I was saying, do you understand the maths on self-publishing? And they were saying, what do you mean? Well, you sell a book at $2.99, you're taking home £2.40. Like, you know, I had 1,000 pre-orders for my second book. No one knew who I was, but I still had 1,000 pre-orders at $2.99. So that was $2,500 before it was even published. And, you know, I'm fine. Anyway, the long and the short of it was I ended up going with a publisher, as it were, to use it as a kind of lost leader, to get visibility, to get recognition, to, you know, get reviewed.
Yeah. And they can, to be fair, they can get into places that is harder for indie authors at airport shops and you know, high street shops physically. And that's most people still read physical books. And Mark finds the same thing. That's a shop window for him that he builds the rest of his indie career on. So that's your series, The Monk, Detective. Is that right? Dentist, rather.
The dentist, the cyclist, the patient, the politician, and the monk.
Yeah.
And I'm just finishing.
And you did that whole series went with, is it Zeus, did you say?
Head of Zeus, yeah.
Yeah.
Bloomsbury, yeah.
Yeah. And what are your plans? Have you started a second series? Are you going to sort of do something independent?
I'm starting a new series of books, yeah. I've just got another degree. I did a Master of Letters, an M.Lit at Dundee University. I don't know if your followers know, but Dundee is one of the forensic centers of forensic science in Europe. And And they were doing a course which was an MLit in crime fiction and forensic investigation. So we studied the kind of history of crime fiction in this country and in America, and then studied alongside first year forensic investigators doing their course, which was invaluable.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that was, I don't know why I mentioned that, but
no, I'd like to talk about authenticity in a bit, because it's another area of discussion, particularly for crime writers. But I want to just go back to DS Cross,
yeah,
who you say is on the autistic spectrum. First of all, the whole thing about appropriation, I think that's a bit of a minefield today, and probably there's some merit in it in some cases, but I also think a lot of big literary characters wouldn't have been written. Modern day Tony Stark is basically autistic, isn't he? That's a big Marvel hero, and are we now saying to people, to new young authors, you can't write anyone unless they exactly reflect you?
I think you've got to do it thoroughly. You can't just make it a character trait or an accessory. You have to pay respect to it. You've got to know about it because you'll get found out. But also, when you look back at it, I would argue that Cross is in a long tradition of autistic detectives, right from Auguste Dupin, Sherlock Holmes, I think we would argue was on the spectrum.
Holmes's communication, definitely, yeah.
But I think that, what happened with me was, I've had hundreds and hundreds of emails about autism. I've had two negatives, one of which was only autistic people should write autistic book characters, which is a viewpoint. And another was, my nephew's autistic, he's not like your character, which is another viewpoint. But the fact is it's spectrum.
Yeah.
But I've had so many touching emails saying, I had one only the other week from a young mother saying, my son is autistic. I've learned more about his condition from reading your books than all the several textbooks that I bought. I had another one from a man in America who, when I was self-published, who said, I have this company, we're quite a big company at 10,000 employees, and it's quite creative. And we've got one chap who's really difficult, but he's really brilliant. And I've read your book, the first book, and I realized that he has to have Asperger's, now known as ASC. I bought 10 books for my managers to read, 10 of your books for them to read, to understand how to deal with him. And you read that and you think, gosh. And then another recent one from a woman saying, it's so good to see an autistic character portrayed in a positive way at the center of a book. You might be interested to know that I'm autistic and I'm also a serving policewoman in the UK. So in the end, it's been a positive thing.
And without falling into cliche, there is a trait with people on the Asperger spectrum, and I have a family member that I'm not going to divulge about, but I know that there's a career that they've had which involves attention to detail, and frankly, things that I would be bad at because my mind would probably wander at some point. But hours and hours focusing on small detail, that I can see how actually, as a detective, your friend who wrote to you or the fan who wrote to you, my family member whose job involved this long period of tenacity, there is something there, isn't there, for certain careers?
100%. And also and I always say this, always preface this, it is a spectrum. And I'm dealing with the high functioning end of that. But certain common traits are obsessions, with whether it be Victorian tall mast ships or competitive cycling or matchbox collection, and an obsession with routine and patterns. And that, of course, for Cross is fantastic, that other people won't notice something really small that to him is really important. And he loves his paperwork, which all detectives famously hate. He loves his paperwork, and the barristers love him because his conviction rate soars, because he has an odd quirk, which is that when he's charge someone, he'll spend at least 2 days trying to find them an alibi.
Right.
And everyone goes, what are you doing?
That's a thoroughness,
it's
right?
just this process, just to be thorough.
Yeah. Brilliant. I love the fact you came up with that. And yeah, now you're saying that out loud. Obviously, Sherlock Holmes 100% falls into this, as does Poirot. In fact, I seem to remember Christie wrote Poirot occasionally apologizing to people because of his manner, which is interesting looking back, that there was a self-awareness that he did struggle a little bit with emotional connection and normal communications, but he was aware of that. That's that's what you call high functioning. That's what you meant by that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was referred to as Asperger's, but because it's now been proven that he kind of collaborated in a terrible way with the Nazis voluntarily during the war, he's now been discredited, as it were. But people with Asperger's liked being called Asperger's because it marked them as a different type of autism. And what fascinated me was that notion of the high functioning autism in the workplace. And, when you understand that the first diagnosis of Asperger's in this country wasn't made until the early 90s.
Wow.
Before that, people were just seen as awkward or rude, and so people didn't know how to deal with them. But once you know that that is the way someone functions, and you see their value, you it's not like making allowances, but you understand how to function with them.
Yeah.
That's the key thing, and that's what Cross has.
I can see how Cross has been a successful. It's a very gripping premise. So you delved into this. You wrote out the 2 books quite quickly, by the sounds of it. Then during lockdown, I mean, what was your process for structure and actual physical writing? How and when did you do that?
Well, I discovered when I write screenplays, you have to be a lot more organized is the wrong word, but you have to kind of have much more of a grid plan of where this is going, because there are so many things involved, number of cast, locations, budget, countries, whatever. But with a novel, you don't have that. So I found myself writing, knowing who and what they did, who had been killed and what they did. That's all I knew.
Right.
I didn't know anything else.
I mean, you probably enjoyed that, didn't you?
I did, to an extent. I mean, obviously with the first one, it was a bit terrifying. It's about 30,000 words in. You don't know how this is going to end. But what it means is that your readers are on the same page as you, literally. Then you're never ahead of them. You're never giving clues that are false because you don't know they're false. So the detective is never ahead of them, and it gives it quite an organic rhythm. You find that chapters get quicker when you want to move on to the next discovery, whereas if you knew what the discovery would be, you would just write up to it. I found I couldn't write from point A, B, C, D, E. I couldn't do that. It was like painting by numbers for me. This is what happens, now fill it in. I have to find out as I go along.
That's interesting. We've mentioned Dan Brown a lot on this podcast because he's somebody who is able to write where the reader's probably just ahead of the story, which is a brilliant place to be. It's a hard thing to come up with because we all want to be clever and a bit showy-offy when we're writing. You have to really fight that.
Yeah. I mean, I found that with the author's voice. So in screenplays, there has to be an author's voice because a screenplay does many functions. Initially, it's to attract financiers, actors, directors. It's to get them to go, look at this movie. You've got to make this movie. So it's got to be written in a way that lures them in. But then when it goes out of your hands and onto set, you've got to have a voice because you're not there. So it's also got to be a kind of instruction manual as to how you see the film. But you can't do that in novels unless you're writing from an authorial standpoint. And I found that quite difficult. The
keeping yourself out of it.
The notion of adapting to kind of perspectives. Whose perspective is this? Was quite hard. But I loved it. I love the freedom of going down a little sort of tangential wormhole when you're writing, which you can't do as a screenwriter. And I love the ability to have the occasional rant through Cross.
Yeah.
You know,
I read a lot of John le Carre. He enjoyed that as well. And he did that with his last couple of books. There was always a rant through Smiley or someone. The difference in writing is the sheer size of a novel. I mean, screenplays are what? How many words would make up a screenplay?
I don't know how many words they would be, but they would be, well, I could look one up and tell you, but roughly you want, in A4, you want to be about 110 pages. Right. That's double spaced, and that's, you know, so it's quite hard. Well, double spaced except for the stage directions.
So novels are 4 times the size of that.
More. Six times. And you, what's interesting about that is it's easier to shift stuff around in a screenplay because everything's a lot more recent to you. You're aware of what you've written before a lot more. But when you're 2 months in and you think, hang on, what did I put in chapter 3? Oh my God, he's not even called that. I got the name wrong. You know, shifting blocks around have a lot more repercussions in books, which makes the edit process fascinating.
It is a bit daunting, a novel. I found that with my first novel in particular. I honestly didn't know where to start and therefore didn't for a year or two. Whereas now... I understand that. I mean,
but, you know, I think I said this at the conference. My advice to writers is don't sit... If you want to write a novel, don't sit down with the intention to write a novel that day. Sit down and write. Write bits, right? You've got your favorite scene that you know is going to happen in Act 3 of the book. Write the scene. You've got a brilliant bit of dialogue that you've had running around your head for months. Put it on paper. You know, I start with an A3 artist pad and I just write down things that come to me and I kind of invent a cast. I had no idea how they relate to anything, but that would be quite interesting. Just do that. You know, that's writing.
Yeah.
You know, it's that kind of, I've got someone who's doing a rewrite on a script of mine at the moment. And I said to her, look, don't sit down to rewrite this script. Write some favorite bits. Just write some bits. And then you find your way in, you know, and I found, I sometimes, you know, I'm 20,000, 30,000 words into a book. And then one day I go, I'm in. Thank God I'm in.
Yeah.
You know, it just clicks. Even in the edit, you go, you know, yesterday I'm editing book 6 and I was struggling a bit. And then yesterday I went, right. I get it. Okay. It's never going to be perfect. You know, you're always going to, you're always going to have, you know, imposter syndrome because basically a book comes from there to your piece of paper. I mean, I write longhand. I write in fountain pen. I'm a real dinosaur. And I write my screenplays in longhand.
Wow.
I've tried writing directly into the computer. It just doesn't work. It's just a different process for me. It goes into the computer in the end. And now, thank God, with iPads, I then can rewrite by scribbling over my document. But, you know, it's so that makes it feel even less real. You know, when you're sitting in Islington, scribbling on a piece of paper, Shrek goes back into the swamp. You could be forgiven for thinking it's just a divine practical joke.
Yeah.
You're not actually writing this movie at all. You know, it's such an insane thing to do.
Did that ever get made, Shrek 4? The new version?
No, it didn't. No. Oh, well, Shrek Goes Forth got made. It didn't do very well. Okay. There was a funny story about that. My executive on the movie, the studio was run by this great man called Jeffrey Katzenberg. He's one of the last great moguls and obsessed with animation. When he worked at Walt Disney, he used to go down to the archives at night and study Walt Disney's hand-painted cells, you know.
Wow.
Real obsessive. And anyway, Shrek Goes Forth, I think it was called. Never seen it, obviously, for personal reasons. And it didn't do brilliantly well. And my executive had an A5 copy of the script made, of my script, and had it framed in a glass box on which it was written, in case of emergency, break glass. And there was a hammer hanging off the side.
Brilliant.
which was nice, just not as nice as if the film had been made,
Yeah, yeah. In terms of screen adaptations, did you write Cross with a view to it potentially being adapted to a TV?
Yeah, originally it started off as a kind of an idea for TV. But it's so, you can't have any expectations. I know what that business is like. And, we've had approaches, and obviously a lot of people who love the book are going, oh, this has got to be a TV. But there are so many, we'll see. I'd love it to be a TV, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think it would make a great TV with the right actor.
And do you find yourself writing, because there is a different way. So if you don't really think too much about TV and film, you can write a very expensive way of filming it with all sorts of, suddenly they're on a cruise ship or aeroplanes involved. And with your mind, probably even without you thinking about it, have you sort of laid it out in a way that would work for TV?
Not consciously. I haven't tried to restrict myself in that way, because those things are easily cut.
Okay.
So there's no point in restricting yourself unless it's essential. No, I mean, they're based in Bristol and it's quite manageable. But I think it's a mistake I don't think of TV and I don't think of actors when I write the Cross books. I just want to write really good books. And if they then get made into TV, fine. I still feel I have a long way to go in learning my craft as a novelist. I had 35 years to learn it as a screenwriter. And this is just the beginning.
Well,
so
it seems like you make a pretty decent start of it, Tim. And I mean, you'd be up there with Peter May. And when I was looking at you on Amazon earlier, his books were coming up next to yours, and I think you outranked him on a couple of them. So you made a fantastic start, and you've had a taste of independent publishing.
Well, yeah. So I'm obsessed with numbers and looking at charts and stuff. It really interests me at the moment that 3 of my books are in Amazon Prime, which is great. But number 2 book, The Cyclist, which historically wasn't a big seller, has suddenly shot up the charts. It's declining a bit at the moment, but it got up to number 21.
Wow.
And it's book 2 out of 5. And you're thinking, and you can't work out why. That's what's frustrating. If you're a self-publisher, you'd be looking at it thinking, what have I done? I need to know what I've done so I can repeat it.
Yeah. You don't always know that, do you?
Into the 40s, but there was a period about 4 weeks ago, I had 4 books in the overall top 100 of Amazon, which is pretty good, because you understand what those figures mean when you've come out of self-publishing. You don't understand them so much when you're published.
Yeah. Well, all the books I've looked at are ranking extremely highly, really well at the moment, so I can see how well they're doing. And you say you think you will go back to the next series? I mean, surely Zeus are going to want...
Oh, yeah. No. There's a lot to come from Cross. I'm just finishing book 6. The reason I brought up Dundee was I did... part of it was you had to do a 30,000-word dissertation, which would go towards a new novel. And I started by doing a Cross. And then I thought, what am I doing? I've got Cross. He's going really well. So I've got a new book series coming out of the Dundee project. And I hope I'll have the first one finished by the autumn, and then we'll see if anyone wants to publish it. But as I keep saying to people, I meet quite a lot of traditionally published authors, and one said to me last year, my contract's up. I really worried. I don't know if my publisher will renew. And I went, why are you worried? They went, well, if they don't renew. And I went, self-publish. And they look at you as if you're a bit mad. And you go, you've got to understand it's a new and brave world out there. People like Mark Dawson and Adam Croft and Rachel McLean are selling, and Simon McLeod are selling millions of books.
LJ Ross,
LJ Ross, what, just gone through 8 million or something?
Crazy.
I mean, it's not vanity publishing anymore. And obviously a lot of people don't do it properly. They need to do your course.
Yes.
It takes a lot of work, but I loved it. I loved doing all the work and figuring it out. But for me, it's the same. I said to my agent, look, I'm going to write this book. And she went, yeah, I think that sounds really interesting. We'll see what the publishers think. And I went, it doesn't really matter to me because, I'm being published. I'm visible. If a publisher doesn't pick this up, I'll self-publish it very happily.
Yeah. You mentioned Dundee, so this course on forensics. Authenticity is a sword you have to carry when you're a crime fiction writer. And I think a lot of people really enjoy the genre, whether it's TV, film, or books, because of their authenticity and the latest techniques in seeing that. And I imagine you have some pretty nitty readers who will pick up on things that simply aren't the case. You probably have a lot of people in the industry, right, in the law enforcement industry reading you. So is this do you find that a comfortable sword to carry?
Yeah, I think you've got to have a balance. I don't like writers who show off their knowledge, and every page is littered with acronyms and police language they picked up from somewhere. The police officers I deal with and talk to are fairly, they know it's fiction, and they like to read some of them don't read crime fiction, some of them do, but they know it's crime fiction. And actually, some murder inquiries are mind-numbingly tedious.
Yes.
In real life.
Yeah.
Well, people don't want to read that. Right. But I think you try not to make too many mistakes. That's what I try to do. But, in The Cyclist, I had budget cuts, which I thought I came across budget cuts. And I came across the fact that in the Southwest, each police force had its own diving unit. And now the three major police forces in the Southwest share one, and so you have to book it. Well, you can't book it because you don't know when you're going to need it.
No.
And forensics have become freelance, the forensic centers now where stuff gets couriered to them. And that means budget because then you're paying. And so it's a very, that interests me, working under those restrictions.
That definitely feels reality to me, dealing with budget cuts. And there are some series. I mean, Silent Witness is the one that always got me, because at the time Silent Witness was doing really well. I was a BBC News reporter covering murders, and I vaguely knew Dr. Nat Carey is a fantastic forensic pathologist for the Eastern region. He's a very serious, business-like guy, and he goes in and he doesn't really talk to the press very much. Most I saw him talk was giving evidence in Crown Court later, and he would do that in a very methodical way. And the framework that he operated in was here, and he was brilliant at it. And lots of murderers are in prison, and families have been well served by him. And then you watch Silent Witness, and she's knocking on doors, and she's into people's kitchen, and she's deciding to go and interview somebody. And it was so crazily unrealistic. But at the same time, people loved it, and it still sort of looked realistic to people.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
You're going to hold your counsel on that, I can see.
Yeah. I mean, what interests me is, I learned one thing I learned on the forensics course was remit. So when forensic investigators go to a crime scene, they're given a remit. They will be asked to look at something. There are people that process everything, crime scene investigators, and there are forensics that will analyze things. And if they're going to be expert witnesses, they're told to stay within that remit. So say it's blood splatter on a back wall. When they go to court, the prosecution or the defense rather will try to have a dig at their expertise. Mm-hmm. So if they go outside of their remit that they've been given, they can easily be shot down. So say you're talking about blood spatter and the defense goes, yeah, but what about the footprint in the blood on the carpet? That wasn't in my remit. I'm just here to talk about the blood splatter on the wall. That is my expertise. Footprints and blood on a carpet and that's how they maintain their credibility, and that's how they, and so Silent Witness is way off the.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just someone. Well, I'm not going to say.
And I suppose the example I was giving is it in some ways it doesn't matter because it did hugely well and people watched it and enjoyed
it. Does, and and to an extent, if you run a series that long, you're going to run out of cases.
Yeah.
But for me, the challenge with Cross is because of how he is, he doesn't have gut instincts about things. He doesn't like people for crimes. He only goes on what's in front of him, which can be frustrating for the people around him, but it makes him incredibly precise. It can be incredibly frustrating for the author because you go, I can't go down that road, because why would he wouldn't think that?
Yeah.
He wouldn't go. And so obviously I've got other people who will come in and do that for him. But, you know, he doesn't theorize. He doesn't believe in theories, but he will often listen to other people's in case it, you know, lights something in his sort of brain.
Yeah. Well, my area is air crashes, which are a feature in my books. And I know from my experience that half of them is that everyone thinks they know knows what's gone wrong with an plane when it crashes. And half the time you're right. The other half the time you are so wrong. It's unbelievable. And that's why all the professionals involved in it, when asked immediately in the aftermath, won't speculate, because you need to pick through the debris and find things out, which I guess is how your guy's working, and how good detectives will work. The Bamba case is the famous one in the UK, isn't it? Where people in America might not be familiar with it. It has been televised a couple of times, but a family slaughtered in a farmhouse in rural Essex, and a very heartbroken son. It took them a long time to work out. In fact, it took somebody kind of on the fringes of the investigation to be dogged and say, you're overlooking something really obvious here. The son did it.
Yeah, and weirdly, he still has a hugely vocal campaigning group saying he didn't do it.
Yeah, he almost got away with it.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I'm an RAF baby.
Oh.
and I grew up in all sorts of places, and one place was Singapore. I grew up in Changi, which is now where the airport is.
Yeah, my father flew into there as an RAF pilot, probably maybe even when you were there. Who knows? Really?
And we lived at the end of the runway pretty much. And there was an old bomber that they used for fire practice. And of course, this is in the late 60s. So it was just, I could just walk in, and me and my friends would go on bombing missions in a real plane. It stank of cordite and burnt and stuff. But it was just, you know, and a hazard of all sorts of proportions, broken glass. But it was just fabulous. It was like sort of, you know, it was like Swallows and Amazons, but with planes.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I had very similar. So I was an RAF child as well. And I think it was Haslar Hospital down in Portsmouth. For some reason, there was a derelict RAF Wessex with grass growing up around it. And we did exactly the same. You had to climb all the way to the top of the helicopter. You were a long way up in that. And I dread to think of the health and safety implications, but we loved it. And I love that. That smell is still powerful too. If I go to an air museum, those aircraft have a particular smell. But so no, I wouldn't surprise me if my father flew into Changi around that time, late 60s. Wow. He was there. So I think there were 2 airfields at the time.
Yes, there were.
There's now just the one, isn't there? The main, or I don't know if the military one's still there, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. I'll check his logbooks. Look, we've sort of come to the end of our 40 minutes. It's ripped past, Tim. Hugely enjoyed talking to you. I just want to congratulate you on your success. You know, the one thing you haven't said is that you're a brilliant writer, but I'm going to say it because that's got to be at the heart of why your books have taken off so well and done so well. And I think you're in a fabulous position to have a very successful indie published career. We keep sort of waiting for the very big name to say, do you know what? I'm not going to sign another publishing contract. I'm going to do this indie now. But you could come up from that other route, I think, and do that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate those comments. And, you know, I said it on the South Bank. Thank you for your course. I simply wouldn't have got to where I've got to without it.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
There we go. That was Tim Sullivan, one of the panelists on our crime panel last month. Last month? This is July now. What was last month? Last month. Track of time.
Yeah.
But just to reiterate, the digital version of the conference is being released on August the 3rd. You can get a ticket at selfpublishingformula.com/digital, where you'll get that session, all the other sessions, and value-added stuff about how to build a website and so on. It'll be a great ticket. $99, an absolute snip at that. Okay, Mark, I think that is it for this recording. We are back to recording a couple because it's the middle of the summer and we're having a little bit of R&R. Although when you work for yourself, all of us, I think, listening to the show and producing a show in that position, you never quite get a whole day off to yourself, but that's okay as well. Good. I think that's it, unless you've got anything else to add.
No, not at all. I'm good.
Good. Then all remains to be said. It's just goodbye from him.
And a goodbye from me. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/selfpublishingshow. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with the Self-Publishing Show.